The moment Billionaire CEO Vivian Hale saw her late husband's necklace resting against a single father's chest, the entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. 8 years had passed since Nathan died in a mountain rescue. His body had been recovered, but the silver compass she gave him on their first anniversary had vanished without a trace. Now it hung around the neck of Caleb Morgan, a widowed father in a worn Navy suit, holding his 7-year-old daughter beneath the crystal lights of a Seattle charity gala. Vivian's first thought was not hope. It was betrayal. But the truth behind that necklace would uncover Nathan's final hours, connect two families shaped by loss, and prove that love does not always return in the form we expect. Stay until the end. You may never look at grief, kindness, or second chances the same way again. Like this video and comment where you are watching from. The accusation still hung between them when Vivian stepped aside and lowered her voice. Not here. Caleb looked past her at the ballroom. Guests were pretending not to listen. A waiter stood frozen beside a tray of champagne. Near the stage, the event host shuffled his note cards while watching them from the corner of his eye. Sophie tightened her arms around her father's neck. Caleb felt it immediately. The small change in her breathing, the way her fingers pressed into the back of his coat. She had learned to read danger in rooms long before any child should have needed to. Vivian noticed it too. For one quiet second, the anger in her face shifted. Not gone, only held back. "There is a library upstairs," she said. "We can speak privately." Caleb did not answer right away. His hand still rested over the silver compass. 8 years ago, it had belonged to a stranger in a storm. 4 years ago, it had been the one object Laura pressed into his palm when he told her he did not know how to raise Sophie alone. Now a billionaire was staring at it as if it were a piece of her own body. 5 minutes, Caleb said. Vivian nodded. They crossed the ballroom without touching. Marianne followed several steps behind, along with a security officer who kept his distance after Vivian gave him a warning look. At the top of the staircase, Vivian opened a paneled door and led them into a private library. The noise from the gala softened as the door closed. Tall windows faced the black water of Elliott Bay. Rain moved across the glass in silver lines. Shelves of leather-bound books covered the walls, and a small fire burned beneath a marble mantel. The room was warm, but Vivian still felt cold. Caleb lowered Sophie onto a sofa. She sat close to him, one hand gripping the sleeve of his jacket. Vivian remained standing. "Where did you get it?" she asked. Caleb looked at the child beside him. "Sophie needs to go home." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You said you found it." "I did." "Then tell me where." "After I get my daughter home." Marianne stepped forward. "We can arrange a car." Caleb turned to her. "Thank you, but no. It is pouring outside," Vivian said. "We came on the bus. I have a driver downstairs." Caleb met her eyes. "I did not ask you for anything." The words were quiet. That made them land harder. Vivian was used to people accepting solutions before she finished offering them. Cars, hotel rooms, hospital bills, private appointments access. Money had always moved the obstacles in front of her. Caleb did not move. Sophie looked between them. "Dad," she whispered, "can we go home?" His expression softened at once. "Yes." Vivian looked at the little girl and saw something she had not expected. Not fear of Caleb. Fear for him. She stepped away from the door. "All right," she said. "Go." Marianne looked at her in surprise. Vivian continued. "But I need to speak with you tomorrow." Caleb reached into his coat pocket and removed a business card. The paper was slightly bent. Morgan Restoration, Custom Furniture, Repairs, Ballard, Washington. He placed it on the table. "Noon," he said, "at my shop." Vivian picked up the card. "You expect me to come to you. I expect you to decide whether answers matter more than convenience." A faint line appeared between her brows. For the first time that evening, something almost like amusement touched Caleb's face. It was gone before she could be certain. He took Sophie's hand and walked out. Vivian stood beside the fire, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. Marianne closed the door. "You let him leave wearing it." Vivian stared at the business card in her hand. "He has a child. That does not make him innocent." "No," Vivian said. "But it means I will not turn her father into a criminal in front of her before I know what happened." Marianne watched her carefully. "Do you believe him?" Vivian looked toward the rain. "I believe he knew Nathan." That frightened her more than the idea of theft. Caleb and Sophie reached their small rented house in Shoreline after 10 that night. Sophie fell asleep against his arm on the bus. Caleb carried her the final 2 blocks through the rain. Their house stood behind a row of tall cedars, its porch light glowing above a faded blue door. The gutters needed cleaning. One shutter hung slightly lower than the other. A pair of yellow rain boots sat beneath the porch bench. Inside, everything was small and carefully kept. Wooden animals lined the windowsill, including a purple bird Sophie said looked less bored than real ones. Caleb set her on the couch and removed her shoes. She opened her eyes. "Was that lady mad at you?" He sat beside her. She was scared. She sounded mad. Sometimes those 2 things sound the same. Sophie looked at the necklace. "Did you steal it?" The question hurt more than he expected. "No, I know." She rubbed one eye. "But she thinks you did." "I think she does not know what to think." Sophie touched the compass with one finger. "Are you going to give it to her?" Caleb looked toward the photograph beside the kitchen sink. Laura stood in a field of late summer grass, holding a baby Sophie against her shoulder. Her hair was shorter then. Her smile was tired and bright. If it belonged to her husband, Caleb said, then yes. Sophie frowned. "But Mom said it helped you find us." Caleb lowered his eyes. After the storm on Stevens Pass, Caleb kept the compass in a kitchen drawer, waiting to identify the stranger who had worn it. Then Laura became sick. At first, the doctors used careful words. Later, they used quieter ones. Caleb sold his larger tools to cover hospital bills and moved their mattress downstairs when Laura could no longer climb. By the final winter, nobody used the word heal. One night after Sophie had fallen asleep, Caleb sat beside Laura on the edge of the bed. Snow pressed against the windows. The house smelled of medicine cold coffee and the lavender lotion Laura still insisted on using. "I cannot do this without you," he told her. Laura had grown so thin that the wedding ring on her hand no longer fit, but her eyes remained steady. "You do not have to do all of it," she said. "I do not even know what that means." "It means tomorrow." He looked away. She reached toward the nightstand and picked up the silver compass. "You told me about the man in the storm 100 times, 90 maybe, 100. You repeat yourself when you are scared." Despite everything, he smiled. Laura placed the compass in his palm and closed his fingers around it. "When tomorrow gets too heavy, remember that somebody once stepped into a storm for you. That does not tell me how to raise Sophie." "No," Laura said. "It reminds you that you are still here to try." After she died, Caleb replaced the broken leather cord himself. He had worn the compass ever since. Now, sitting in the dim living room, he touched the edge of it with his thumb. Sophie rested her head against his shoulder. "Maybe it helped me find you and Mom," he said. "Maybe it was only mine for a while." She considered that. "Can something have 2 homes?" Caleb looked again at Laura's photograph. "I hope so." He carried Sophie to bed and tucked the blankets beneath her chin. Before turning off the light, he noticed a drawing taped to the wall. 3 figures stood beneath a yellow sun. Sophie in the middle, Caleb on one side, Laura on the other. Above Laura, Sophie had drawn a small white star. Caleb stood there longer than he meant to. Across the city, Vivian entered a penthouse that overlooked downtown Seattle. The lights came on automatically as she crossed the foyer. Glass walls revealed the city below white headlights moving through wet streets, ferries cutting across the dark bay office towers shining against the clouds. The apartment looked flawless and untouched. Vivian passed a dining table built for 12 and a piano nobody played. At the end of the hallway stood a closed door. She opened it. Nathan's study had not changed in 8 years. His rescue jacket hung inside the closet. A coffee mug sat beside a stack of old community center plans. Dust had gathered along the edge of a wooden frame that held a photograph of them near Mount Rainier. Vivian picked it up. Nathan was laughing at something outside the frame. His hair was wind-blown. The silver compass rested against his shirt. She remembered the day she gave it to him. They had been married 1 year and still lived in a narrow apartment above a bakery in Capitol Hill. Nathan had gotten lost while carrying home a second-hand table they could barely afford. He arrived 2 hours late with rain in his hair and a scrape along his cheek. Vivian handed him a small box. "A compass," he said. "You clearly need one." He turned it over and read the engraving, "Find your way home." Nathan looked at her differently then. The joke softened into something deeper. "I already did," he said. Vivian sat at his desk. In the bottom drawer was a black case containing everything returned after his death. His watch had stopped at 1:17 in the morning. His wedding ring was scratched along one side. His wallet still held a grocery receipt and a photograph of Vivian taken when she was 27 and certain that success would solve every fear she had. Beneath those items lay the official rescue report. Victim located approximately 2 miles east of primary landslide zone. Severe injuries consistent with secondary slope collapse. Personal necklace not recovered. Vivian read the final line again. For 8 years it had been the end of the story. Now it was not. She closed her eyes and heard Nathan's voice from their last phone call. Rain struck metal behind him. Men shouted in the distance. "You do not have to be the person who runs toward every disaster," she had said. "Maybe not," Nathan replied. "But I am already here, and what am I supposed to do if you do not come back?" There had been silence, then static. The call ended. Vivian had never known whether he heard the fear beneath her anger. She pressed one hand against the edge of the desk. The compass had not been buried beneath the mountain. It had been carried away by a man with tired eyes and a little girl who clung to him when strangers raised their voices. That meant Nathan's final hours contained something nobody had told her. The next morning, Vivian entered the executive conference room at Hale Meridian Technologies in a charcoal suit, her face composed despite an almost sleepless night. After revenue projections and expansion plans, a senior director presented a proposal from a local nonprofit. "It is a vocational program for parents who lost a spouse," he said. "Child care technical training job placement. The projected impact is limited." "How limited?" Vivian asked. "Fewer than 60 families in the first year. There is no meaningful brand value at that scale," another board member said. Vivian studied a photograph of a tired father beside 2 children. For 1 second she saw Caleb, then Nathan. "Decline it," she said. The words came out automatically. The slide changed. The meeting continued. Afterward, Marianne followed Vivian into her office. "You did not read the proposal. I read the summary. You looked at 1 page for 4 seconds. Vivian set down her tablet. "I am meeting Caleb Morgan at noon, with legal counsel number security." Marianne crossed her arms. "You do not know him. I know he has something that belonged to my husband. That is exactly why you should not go alone." Vivian looked at the rain moving down the office windows. "I have spent 8 years surrounded by people who tell me what is safe, and Nathan ignored everyone who did." Vivian turned. The words had cut deeper than Marianne intended. "I am sorry," Marianne said. Vivian's voice softened. "So am I." Before noon, Vivian left the tower without an assistant. Caleb's workshop stood behind an old hardware store in Ballard. The sign above the door read Morgan Restoration. Inside, sawdust floated through pale afternoon light. Clamps and hand tools covered one wall. Half-restored chairs stood beside scarred tables waiting for repair. Caleb was bent over a rocking chair when Vivian entered. A small radio played quietly near the window. He glanced at the clock. "You are early. Most people call that punctual. Most people do not arrive 19 minutes before noon." Vivian removed her coat. "Do you always make people wait only when the glue is setting?" She watched him secure a narrow piece of wood along the chair's curved arm. His hands were rough, marked by old cuts, but his movements were patient. The damaged chair received his complete attention. "What happened to it?" Vivian asked. "Someone tried to repair the break with nails. Did that work for about 3 weeks. He wiped his hands on a cloth. "People do strange things when they are afraid something cannot be saved." Vivian looked at the repaired line. "And you can save it. I can make it strong again." "Will the break disappear?" "No." He met her eyes. "That is not the same thing as failure." The words settled between them. Vivian looked away first. A framed photograph of Laura and Sophie stood on a shelf behind him. Beside it was a small wooden bird with crooked wings. "Your wife?" Vivian asked. Caleb nodded. "Laura. She was beautiful. She was loud." Vivian looked at him. His mouth curved slightly. She laughed before the joke ended. Sang every song wrong, left coffee cups in rooms she had not been in for hours. "You miss what annoyed you, most of all." Vivian understood that too well. Nathan used to leave rescue maps across the dining table. He lost his keys twice a week. He believed every broken appliance could be repaired with confidence and tape. For years, Vivian had tried to remember him only as noble. Caleb's words reminded her that love lived in irritation as much as sacrifice. He walked to a locked cabinet at the back of the workshop. Before opening it, he turned toward her. The necklace was found after a landslide on Stevens Pass. Vivian's body went still. Caleb unlocked the cabinet and removed a worn paper envelope. I was driving home from a delivery. The highway was closing. A family was trapped inside an SUV. He placed the envelope on the workbench. There was already a man there when I stopped. Vivian stared at Caleb's hand resting over the paper. Was it Nathan? I never knew his name. Did you see him die? No. Her breath left her. Caleb continued. I saw him go back into the storm. Vivian reached for the envelope. Caleb kept one hand on it. Inside, something shifted against the paper. A photograph. Maybe more than one. I have spent almost 9 years trying to understand what happened that night, he said. I called hospitals, rescue units, police departments. Nobody could give me an answer. Vivian's fingertips rested on the edge of the envelope. You had his necklace. I had no name. You had his face. Not clearly. She looked at him. Caleb slowly lifted his hand. Before you decide what kind of man I am, he said, you need to hear what your husband did. The envelope remained between them, thin enough to hold only paper, heavy enough to carry nearly 9 years of unanswered questions. Vivian did not sit. Neither did Caleb. Outside the workshop windows, rain tapped softly against the glass, nothing like the violent storm he was about to describe. Still the sound pulled him backward, back to a night when the mountain had seemed alive, back to the stranger who had run toward danger while everyone else was trying to escape it. Caleb opened the envelope and removed a faded photograph. He placed it face down on the workbench. Let me tell it in order, he said. Vivian folded her arms, not out of impatience, but because she needed something to hold together. Caleb looked past her toward the gray light beyond the window. It was late October. Laura and I had been married 3 years. I was doing delivery work for an antique dealer in Wenatchee because restoration jobs were slow. His voice changed as he spoke. The workshop faded around him. The smell of fresh sawdust gave way to wet asphalt gasoline and mountain air. The past opened. 9 years earlier, Caleb drove west through Stevens Pass in an old white delivery truck that shook whenever the speedometer climbed above 50. The cargo area was empty. He had delivered a walnut dining table to a family outside Wenatchee and was trying to reach Seattle before the weather turned worse. Rain struck the windshield in hard, uneven bursts. The wipers moved at their highest setting and still could not clear the glass. Trees leaned over the highway like dark figures. Every few minutes, the radio cut through static with another warning. Flash flooding, falling rock, possible closures near the summit. Caleb tightened both hands around the steering wheel. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Laura, he pressed the speaker button. Tell me you pulled over, she said. Her voice was warm, but he heard the worry under it. I am moving at the speed of an elderly turtle. An elderly turtle would have enough sense to stop. I am 30 minutes from the west side. That is what you said 30 minutes ago. The mountain is longer in the rain. The mountain is the same length, Caleb. He smiled despite himself. The road curved sharply to the left. Headlights appeared through the rain, blurred and pale. I will call when I reach Monroe, he said. Pull over if it gets worse. It cannot get worse. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Laura went quiet. Caleb sighed. That was poorly timed. It was. A pause followed. Laura seemed about to say something. What, Caleb asked. Nothing. You have a nothing voice. I do not have a nothing voice. You definitely do. She laughed softly. Just come home. I will. I mean it. I know. The signal cracked. Her voice disappeared into static. Caleb glanced at the phone. Laura. The call ended. He placed the phone back in the cup holder. Years later, he would remember the unfinished tone in her voice and learn what she had almost told him. She was pregnant. She had taken the test that morning. She planned to tell him when he walked through the door. At the time, all Caleb knew was that the woman he loved was waiting for him, and the road ahead was beginning to vanish. A red glow appeared around the next bend. Not brake lights, hazard lights. Caleb slowed. The mountain dropped steeply to his right. A wall of dark rock rose to his left. Mud covered half the road. An SUV sat at an angle against the rock wall, its front end crushed beneath fallen branches and stone. Another car had stopped several yards behind it with the driver's door hanging open. Caleb pulled onto the shoulder. For 1 second he stayed behind the wheel. Rain hammered the roof. The radio repeated the warning to avoid unstable slopes. Then he saw a small hand strike the fogged rear window of the SUV. Caleb was out of the truck before he had time to think. Cold rain soaked through his coat almost instantly. A man in a yellow rescue jacket was already moving toward the wreck. He carried a flashlight in one hand and a metal bar in the other. "Kill your engine," the man shouted. Caleb looked back at the truck. Why, fuel line could be damaged. Kill it and grab anything that can break glass. Caleb ran back, shut off the engine, and pulled an emergency hammer from beneath the passenger seat. When he returned, the stranger was kneeling beside the SUV. Mud reached his ankles. The vehicle had been pushed sideways into the rock. The driver's door was pinned. The passenger side faced the slope. Inside, a woman was trapped behind the steering wheel. 2 children were in the back. A boy, perhaps 5 years old, cried against the window. An older girl had blood running from her forehead. The stranger shone his light through the rear glass. "Can you hear me?" The woman nodded frantically. "My leg is stuck. We are getting the children out first. No, please, take them. That is what we are doing." His voice was steady, not calm. Steady. Caleb could see fear in the man's eyes. He kept looking toward the slope, measuring every sound. "You with search and rescue?" Caleb asked. "Volunteer unit. Where's the rest of your team on the way?" The stranger pointed to the rear window. "Hit the lower corner, not the center." Caleb raised the hammer and struck. The glass cracked but did not break. He hit it again. The window shattered inward. The little boy screamed. The stranger pulled off his jacket and laid it across the broken edge. "Easy," he said. "You are doing fine. Look at me." The boy looked at him. "What is your name, Eli?" "All right, Eli. I'm going to reach inside. You're going to take my arm. Can you do that?" The boy nodded. The stranger pushed his upper body through the window. The SUV shifted beneath him. Caleb grabbed the man's belt. "Do not let me slide," the stranger said. Was not planning on it. The man reached deeper. "I have him." Caleb pulled. The stranger emerged with the boy pressed against his chest. He handed Eli to Caleb. "Take him to your truck. Higher side of the road." Caleb carried the child away. Eli clung to him with both arms. "My mom is still in there. I know. And my sister, I know. Do not leave them." Caleb lowered him beside the truck. "I am going back." A woman from the second vehicle had emerged with a blanket. Caleb wrapped it around Eli and ran toward the SUV. The stranger was already climbing through the broken window again. The girl in the back seat was trapped beneath a folded section of metal. "She cannot move her leg," the mother cried. The man examined the crushed frame. "We need leverage." Caleb held up the tire iron. "Will this work?" "It has to." They wedged the iron beneath the bent seat bracket. The stranger pulled while Caleb pushed. The metal groaned. The girl cried out. "Stop!" The mother screamed. The man looked at the child. "What is your name, Abby? Abby, listen to me. We have to move the seat. It is going to hurt." She shook her head. "I know," he said. "I am sorry, but I need you to be brave for 10 seconds. I cannot." "Yes, you can." "How do you know?" "Because you already have been." The girl stared at him. Rainwater poured through the broken window. The man looked at Caleb. "Ready?" Caleb nodded. They pulled again. The bracket lifted half an inch, then 1 inch. The girl dragged her leg free. The stranger gathered her into his arms. As he backed through the window, a stone struck his shoulder. He dropped to one knee. Caleb caught the girl before she hit the ground. "You are hurt," Caleb shouted. The man rolled his shoulder and winced. "So is she." Caleb carried Abby toward her brother. Behind him, the stranger returned to the vehicle. The mother was still trapped. Water mixed with mud beneath the floorboards and rose around her shoes. Sirens sounded somewhere beyond the curve, too far away. The woman in the second car called out that the slope was moving. Caleb looked up. Small rocks bounced across the road. The stranger braced himself against the driver's door. "Can you feel your foot?" he asked the trapped woman. "No." "Can you move your knee?" "I do not know." "Try," she cried out. The steering column had pressed into her leg. Caleb climbed through the rear window and crawled over the seats. The air inside smelled of blood and burned rubber. He reached beneath the dashboard. There was a metal support across her ankle. The stranger moved to the front of the vehicle and examined the shattered windshield. "We cannot pull her through the back. What do we do? Break the front glass and lift the column?" With what the stranger looked toward Caleb's delivery truck. "You carry tools some." "Jack, yes, get it." Caleb ran. By the time he returned, the sirens were louder, but the road behind them had become blocked by fallen branches. He handed over the jack. The stranger wedged it beneath the bent steering column. "Slow," he said. Caleb turned the handle. Metal creaked. The mother screamed. The stranger reached through the windshield and held her shoulders. "Stay with me, my children. They are safe. Do not lie to me. I am not lying." She searched his face. "Are they really safe?" "Yes." The steering column rose enough for her leg to move. Caleb climbed deeper into the SUV and pulled her free. The stranger guided her through the windshield. Together they lowered her onto the wet road. The woman from the second car covered her with another blanket. For one brief moment, the three rescued family members were together on the higher shoulder. The mother held both children against her and sobbed into their hair. Caleb stood in the rain chest, heaving. The stranger looked toward the slope. His expression changed. "Move," he said. Caleb barely heard him. "What move now?" A deep cracking sound came from above. The stranger lunged. He struck Caleb in the chest and drove him toward the ground. A branch crashed where Caleb had been standing. Stone and mud swept across the road. Caleb felt his head strike the pavement. For several seconds there was no sound. Then the world returned in fragments. Rain against his face, a child crying, someone shouting for medical bags. Caleb opened his eyes. The stranger was on his knees several feet away, coughing. His rescue jacket was torn along one sleeve. A thin leather cord hung from the back of Caleb's coat. The silver compass was gone. Caleb did not notice. Emergency lights filled the road. Rescuers moved through the rain, lifting the injured onto stretchers. A paramedic knelt beside Caleb and shone a light into his eyes. "What is your name, Caleb? Do you know where you are? Stevens Pass? Did you lose consciousness? I do not know." The paramedic pressed gauze against his temple. Caleb pushed his hand away. The other man. What man? The volunteer. Yellow jacket. The paramedic looked toward the emergency vehicles. "There are several volunteers." Caleb sat up. The stranger was helping carry the mother toward an ambulance. His injured shoulder hung lower than the other, but he kept moving. Caleb tried to stand. The road tilted beneath him. The paramedic forced him down. "You have a concussion. I need to talk to him. You need to stay still." The stranger disappeared behind an ambulance. Caleb raised his voice. "Hey!" No response. He shouted again. "Hey, what is your name?" The stranger emerged on the far side of the ambulance. For a second their eyes met through the rain. Caleb lifted one hand. The man did the same. Then a rescue coordinator ran toward him and pointed up the service road. Words passed between them that Caleb could not hear. The coordinator shook his head. The stranger looked toward the slope. Another rescuer joined them. The stranger pointed again. This time, Caleb heard part of it. "There is someone up there." The coordinator caught his arm. The stranger pulled free. A young emergency worker handed him a second jacket. He put it on over his injured shoulder. Then he and another volunteer began moving uphill. Caleb struggled to stand again. The paramedic held him back. "Do not. He is hurt. So are you. He is going back up there." The paramedic followed Caleb's gaze. The two volunteers had reached the blocked service road. The stranger paused. He turned once, looking down at the families beside the ambulances. Not at Caleb. At the children. Then he disappeared into the storm. Caleb never saw him again. The flashback loosened its grip. The workshop returned slowly. Vivian stood motionless across the workbench. Her hands were pressed flat against the wood. Why did the official report say Nathan arrived after midnight? I do not know. You are certain it was before 10. I checked the time when Laura called. It was 9:37. I saw the SUV less than 20 minutes later. Vivian looked at the face-down photograph. Why did no one identify him? The first crews came from different districts. The road was blocked in 3 places. People were taken to different hospitals. I gave a statement, but I described a volunteer in a yellow jacket. I never knew his name. And the necklace, I found it 3 days later. Caleb turned the photograph over. Vivian did not look at it yet. She was still trapped in the image of Nathan walking back into the rain. Caleb continued. The state reopened one lane for recovery crews. My truck had to be towed. I went back to collect my tools. The memory returned. 3 days after the storm, the mountain was quiet. Fog moved between the trees. The road remained scarred with mud and broken stone. Caleb walked along the shoulder with an officer while workers cleared debris. His head still ached from the concussion. He found one of his missing toolboxes near a drainage ditch. As he lifted it, something flashed beneath a layer of wet earth. He crouched and dug with his fingers. The silver compass emerged from the mud. The leather cord was broken. The metal was scratched. On the back were 4 words, "Find your way home." Caleb carried it to the officer. This belonged to one of the volunteers. The officer placed it in a clear evidence bag. Name I do not know. Unit I do not know that either. The officer wrote down Caleb's contact information. Months later, the compass was returned after no owner had been confirmed. Caleb called hospitals, rescue stations, and county offices. He mailed copies of his statement. Some offices never responded. Others said too many volunteers had crossed between districts that night. Early reports mentioned a rescuer killed during the second collapse, but the first articles used no photograph. By the time Nathan's name appeared in wider coverage, Caleb was caring for a pregnant wife, taking extra work, and trying to recover from the loss of his delivery truck. He saw the name Nathan Hale once. It meant nothing to him. He had known only of face and rain. A month after the accident, the family from the SUV sent Caleb a letter. Inside was a photograph taken beside the emergency vehicles. The picture was grainy. Caleb stood in front blood at his temple, one hand resting on the shoulder of the little boy named Eli. Behind him stood the stranger, Nathan. His face was turned partly toward the camera. The yellow rescue jacket was open at the throat. The silver compass was visible against his shirt. Back in the workshop, Vivian finally looked down. Her breath caught. Nathan stood in the background of the photograph, younger than the man she remembered from the funeral home. Alive, exhausted. His hair was wet against his forehead. One arm hung stiffly beside him. Vivian touched his image with one finger. This is him. I thought it might be. No. Her voice broke. It is him. Caleb watched her. He had expected anger questions, perhaps disbelief. He had not expected the unbearable tenderness in the way she touched the photograph. Vivian picked it up. Behind Nathan stood a woman wrapped in a red scarf. A teenage boy leaned against her side. Farther up the road, 2 rescue workers were speaking beside a van. Vivian brought the image closer. Where did this come from? The family in the SUV mailed it to me. Do you still have the letter? Caleb searched the envelope and removed several folded pages. Vivian read the first. The handwriting belonged to the rescued mother. She thanked Caleb for helping her children. She mentioned the volunteer who had returned uphill after the photograph was taken. She did not know his name. Vivian turned to the next page. A newspaper clipping showed the mountain road after the slide. Another listed the dead and injured. Nathan's name appeared near the bottom. Caleb had circled it years earlier. I called the number in that article, he said. It led to a county office. They could not connect me to his family. Vivian stared at the date. This was published 2 days before Nathan's memorial. I did not see it until weeks later. She looked at him. Why did you keep searching? Caleb touched the edge of the workbench. Because he saved my life. That does not explain 9 years. He considered the question. Maybe I needed to know the kind of man who would go back up that road. Vivian lowered the clipping. He always went back. There was bitterness in her voice now, but love beneath it. Caleb did not interrupt. Vivian studied the photograph again. Her eyes stopped on the woman in the red scarf. She moved toward the workshop window where the light was stronger. What is it? Caleb asked. I have seen her before. Where Vivian turned the photograph over. There was no name written on the back, only a date and the word Stevens Pass. She reached for her phone and opened a folder of images from Nathan's memorial service. Years earlier, a local rescue association had sent photographs taken by volunteers and survivors. Vivian had looked through them once, then never opened the folder again. She scrolled slowly. Nathan beside a community shelter. Nathan repairing a roof. Nathan carrying boxes into a church basement. Then she stopped. A woman in a red scarf stood at the back of the memorial crowd holding the hand of a teenage boy. The same woman. Vivian placed the phone beside the faded photograph. Caleb leaned closer. It is her. She attended Nathan's memorial. Then she knew who he was. Maybe not during the rescue. But afterward, Vivian enlarged the digital image. A volunteer badge hung from the woman's coat. The text was blurred, but the organization's name was visible. Cascade Family Recovery Network. Vivian knew the group. Hale Meridian had donated computers to one of its shelters years ago. She opened a search page and typed the organization's name. Several photographs appeared. One showed a small roadside cafe in Skykomish. A woman stood beneath the sign, older now, her hair streaked with gray. The red scarf was gone. The face was the same. Grace Walker. Vivian read the short profile beneath the image. Mountain disaster survivor. Community volunteer. Owner of Walker's Table. Caleb looked from the screen to Vivian. You found her. Vivian did not answer. She opened an archived article linked to Grace's profile. The page loaded slowly. A photograph showed Grace speaking at a winter safety event. Beneath it, the caption stated that she and her daughter had survived the Stevens Pass landslide that killed volunteer rescuer Nathan Hale. Her daughter. Vivian looked again at the faded photograph. The teenage boy Caleb had noticed was not a boy. It was a girl with short hair, wrapped in an oversized coat. Caleb read the article over Vivian's shoulder. She was there after I left. Vivian's fingers tightened around the phone. She knew what happened to him. The workshop fell silent except for the rain. For 8 years, Vivian had accepted a report written from scattered evidence. A location, a time, a body recovered after the mountain settled. No witness had ever described Nathan's last conscious moments to her. No one had told her whether he spoke, whether he was afraid, whether he called her name. Caleb saw the questions gather in her face. He did not tell her to calm down. He did not offer an empty assurance. He simply reached across the workbench and turned the photograph toward her again. Nathan stood there in the rain, caught between one rescue and another. His hand rested against his injured shoulder. His face was tired, but he was looking toward someone outside the frame with the beginning of a smile. Vivian touched the compass visible against his chest. This was the last photograph ever taken of him, she said. Caleb looked at Nathan's blurred face. No. Vivian raised her eyes. Caleb pointed to the date written on the back. It was the last photograph anyone gave you. Vivian looked down at Grace Walker's address on the screen. Then she closed her hand around the old photograph, careful not to bend it. I need to speak with her. Caleb nodded. Vivian looked at him. Come with me. His expression tightened. I have work. I am not asking as your employer. You are not my employer. I know. The answer came softer than he expected. Vivian set the photograph back on the workbench. I am asking because you were there when his final night began. Caleb glanced toward Laura's picture on the shelf. The compass rested beneath his shirt, warm against his skin. Vivian waited. No command, no offer of money, only the request. Caleb reached for his coat. When Vivian picked up the envelope, now became 30 minutes later. Caleb had to call the owner of the hardware store and ask him to watch the workshop. Vivian returned 2 unanswered messages from her office, then silenced her phone before either of them could change their minds. They left Seattle beneath a low gray sky. Vivian drove. Caleb had expected a driver, a black sedan, perhaps an assistant in the front seat taking notes. Instead, she led him to a dark blue SUV in the parking garage and slid behind the wheel herself. You drive your own car, he said as he fastened his seatbelt. Vivian started the engine. Only when I do not want anyone listening. Caleb looked toward her. That happen often, no? She pulled into traffic. Rain blurred the city into glass and headlights. They crossed Lake Washington, then followed the highway east as office towers gave way to low houses, wet fields, and dark stands of cedar. For the first 20 minutes, neither spoke. The envelope rested between them on the center console. Each time Vivian glanced at it, Caleb noticed the muscles tighten along her jaw. He looked out the passenger window. He had driven this road many times since the accident. Never with the widow of the man who had saved him. never with the silver compass pressed against his chest like a question. Vivian broke the silence first. What was Laura like before she became sick? Caleb turned from the window. He had expected questions about the storm, the photograph, or the necklace, not Laura. She was exactly the same before she got sick. That cannot be true, it is. Vivian looked at him briefly. People change. Her body changed. Her patience did not. That sounds generous. It is not. She was never patient. A faint smile touched Vivian's mouth. Caleb continued. She taught second grade. She could manage 26 children during a fire drill, but if a grocery line took longer than 5 minutes, she acted like civilization was ending. Vivian laughed before she could stop herself. The sound filled the car for only a moment. Then surprise crossed her face. Caleb watched her. You have not done that in a while. Done what laughed without permission. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. You make a great number of assumptions for a man who met me yesterday. I restore furniture. You learn to notice pressure. I am not furniture. No. Furniture is usually easier. She gave him a look that should have ended the conversation. Instead, it made him smile. The road climbed slowly. Snow appeared along the shoulders, thin at first, then deeper beneath the trees. Vivian turned on the heat. Nathan made coffee strong enough to damage metal, she said. Caleb looked at her. He also left every cabinet door open. Every one. I once walked through the kitchen at night and struck my head hard enough to need stitches. Did he apologize? He said the cabinet had attacked me. That sounds reasonable. It did not. But you laughed. Eventually. Her expression softened as the memory settled. For a few miles they traded small pieces of the people they had lost. Nathan repaired things badly but confidently. Laura sang the wrong words to nearly every song and insisted the singer had made the mistake. Nathan stopped for every stranded driver. Laura once brought home an injured pigeon and kept it in the bathtub for 3 days. Neither Caleb nor Vivian spoke about hospitals' funerals or the long silence afterward. They spoke about coffee cups, cabinet doors, wrong lyrics, and ordinary annoyances. The dead became human again. At the edge of Skycomish, the highway narrowed beside the river. Walker's table stood near an old service station, a low cedar building with a red roof and a hand-painted sign above the entrance. A few trucks were parked outside. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. Vivian slowed, but did not turn in. She drove past. Caleb looked at her. You missed it. I saw it. She continued another 100 yards, then pulled into an empty turnout. Snowmelt moved through the ditch beside the road. Vivian kept both hands on the wheel. Caleb waited. She may not remember him, Vivian said. She attended his memorial. That does not mean she was with him at the end. No, she may tell me something I do not want to hear. That is possible. Vivian turned toward him. You are not very comforting. I do not think comfort means pretending. Her eyes held his. What does it mean staying when pretending would be easier? The engine idled beneath them. Vivian looked back toward the cafe. Then she shifted into reverse. Walker's table smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and wood smoke. A dozen framed photographs covered the walls. Mountain roads in summer, rescue crews standing beside snow vehicles, families smiling beneath trail signs. A woman with gray streaks in her dark hair stood behind the counter pouring coffee for 2 highway workers. Vivian recognized her immediately. Grace Walker was older than the woman in the photograph, but her eyes had not changed. They were alert and guarded the eyes of someone who still listened for danger in ordinary sounds. Vivian stopped near the door. Caleb remained beside her. Grace looked up. Sit anywhere, she said. I will be with you in a minute. Vivian did not move. My name is Vivian Hale. The coffee pot paused above a white ceramic cup. Grace's face emptied of color. She lowered the pot slowly. One of the workers glanced between them. Grace set down the cup. Hale Vivian reached into the envelope and placed the faded photograph on the counter. Grace stared at it. Her fingers rose toward her mouth. Oh, God. The 2 workers looked away, suddenly aware that they were witnessing something private. Grace walked around the counter. She did not pick up the photograph. She looked first at Nathan, then at Caleb. I remember you, she said. Caleb stepped closer. You were there that night. Grace nodded. The paramedics took you down before the second collapse. Vivian's voice came out barely above a whisper. You knew my husband. Grace looked at her. I knew him for less than 2 hours. Then why were you at his memorial? Grace drew in a slow breath. Because those 2 hours changed the rest of my life. She turned the sign on the front door from open to closed. The highway workers quietly gathered their coats and left money beside their plates. Grace locked the door behind them. Come sit down, she said. They took a table near the window. Grace brought coffee, though no one had asked for it. Her hands shook as she placed the cups down. Vivian laid Nathan's photograph in the center of the table. Grace sat across from her. For a while, the only sound came from the stove and the wind moving around the building. I tried to find you after the memorial, Grace said. You were standing 10 yards from me. There were hundreds of people. Reporters, police, rescue volunteers. I asked someone how to contact you, but they told me the family wanted privacy. Vivian looked at the photograph. I did. I wrote a letter anyway. I never received it. Grace closed her eyes for a moment. Then someone decided you should not. Marianne might have filtered it. A lawyer might have placed it with dozens of condolence letters. Vivian had refused to read most of them. She did not know who had failed, only that 8 years had passed because of it. Tell me what happened, Vivian said. Grace looked at Caleb. You remember the family in the SUV, yes? My daughter and I were in a van farther up the service road. Caleb frowned. I saw you near the ambulances. That photograph was taken after we came down, before the second collapse. Vivian leaned forward. Start before Nathan reached you. Grace wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. My daughter Emma was 16. We had gone to visit my brother in Leavenworth. The highway was already bad, but I thought we could get through before the closure. She looked toward the window, though the mountain road outside was calm. A maintenance truck was clearing branches near the service road. A slide hit the upper slope and pushed the truck sideways. Our van stopped behind it. Then another section of mud came down and blocked the road behind us. Grace paused. The maintenance worker was trapped inside his cab. Emma and I were not injured, but the van would not start. We could hear rocks moving above us. Why did you leave the van? Caleb asked. The maintenance worker was screaming. Grace's fingers tightened around the cup. I told Emma to stay inside. I went to him. The driver's door was crushed and his leg was trapped. I could not pull him free. She looked at Vivian. Then Nathan appeared. Vivian's eyes filled, but she did not look away. He was already hurt, Grace said. His shoulder was bleeding through the jacket. He asked how many people were there. I told him 3. What did he say? Vivian asked. He said, Then we bring down 3. Grace's voice trembled. There was another volunteer with him, a young man named Daniel. They tried to lift the dashboard off the driver's leg, but they could not move it. Nathan told Daniel to take Emma down first. Did she go no? She refused to leave me. A small smile passed through Grace's grief. She was stubborn. Vivian lowered her eyes. Nathan liked stubborn people. Yes, Grace said. I think he did. Grace continued. The slope cracked again. Nathan looked uphill and said we had less than 5 minutes. He gave Emma his flashlight and told her to follow Daniel. What about you? Caleb asked. I stayed with the driver. Nathan stayed too. Grace looked at Vivian. He did not act fearless. I want you to know that. Vivian's breath caught. He kept looking toward the mountain. His hands were shaking. He knew exactly how dangerous it was. Vivian stared at the steam rising from her untouched coffee. People always called him fearless. He was not. Grace's eyes were wet. He was afraid and stayed anyway. The words struck deeper than praise ever could. Grace said Nathan found a metal release beneath the dashboard. He and the maintenance worker pushed against it while Grace pulled the man's shoulders. The first attempt failed. The second moved the trapped leg only a few inches. The sound above them grew louder. Daniel shouted from the road that they had to leave. Nathan looked at Grace and told her to take Emma down. I said I would not leave him, Grace recalled. He told me the driver needed someone waiting below who knew his medical history. It was not true. He just needed me out of danger. Vivian could almost hear Nathan saying it. A practical lie delivered as an instruction. Grace took Emma by the hand and followed Daniel downhill. Halfway to the ambulances, Emma turned back. Nathan was still inside the maintenance truck. Then the driver emerged. Nathan had freed him. Daniel ran uphill to help. Together the two volunteers carried the injured man down the service road. That was when the faded photograph had been taken. Caleb looked at the image. Nathan stood behind him, one arm hanging stiffly. Grace and Emma were farther back. A moment of safety caught between disasters. What happened after the photograph, Vivian asked. Grace swallowed. The driver began losing consciousness. Rescue workers loaded him into an ambulance. Then someone realized another car was missing. What car? A small sedan. It had been parked above the maintenance truck before the slide. They thought it had gone over the edge. Caleb leaned forward. I never heard about another car, because it was found empty later. But no one knew that then. Grace looked at Vivian. Nathan believed someone might be trapped below the road. Vivian closed her eyes briefly. Of course he did. The rescue coordinator told everyone to wait for heavy equipment. The slope was unstable. Nathan argued that anyone in the car would not survive the cold until morning. Grace's voice grew quieter. Daniel went with him. Vivian turned toward the window. Outside, a truck passed along the highway tires, hissing across wet pavement. Grace continued. They tied ropes around their waists and climbed below the barrier. Emma and I stayed near the ambulances. We should have left, but she would not go until she knew they were safe. Did they find the car? Caleb asked. Yes, it had been swept into a ravine. No one was inside. Caleb lowered his head. Nathan had risked everything for an empty vehicle. Vivian's expression changed as she read the thought in his face. He did not know it was empty. I know, Caleb said. Grace nodded. They were climbing back when the second collapse began. The room became still. Grace pressed her palms together. There was no warning siren, just a sound like the mountain breaking open. Vivian held the edge of the table. Daniel reached the road first. Nathan was behind him. Grace's voice fractured. A teenage girl from another vehicle had wandered past the barrier looking for her father. She froze when the ground moved. Vivian whispered Nathan saw her. Yes. Grace looked directly at her. He pushed Daniel toward the concrete barrier. Then he ran to the girl. The slide struck the lower road. Nathan reached the girl seconds before the mud and stone came through. He pushed her behind the barrier with Daniel. The force caught Nathan from the side and carried him down the slope. Grace and several rescuers ran toward the edge. The coordinator ordered them back. For 20 minutes, nobody could reach Nathan. When the slope finally stopped moving, Daniel and another rescuer climbed down. They found him trapped beneath broken branches and stone. He was alive. Vivian's face tightened. How long? Grace looked down. Not long. Minutes. Yes. Was he conscious? Yes. Vivian's voice became small. Was he alone? Grace shook her head. No. The answer broke something open inside Vivian. Her shoulders dropped. For 8 years she had pictured darkness cold, and Nathan calling into a storm where no one could hear him. Grace reached across the table but stopped before touching her. I was with him. Vivian stared at her. How the rescuers needed someone to keep him talking while they tried to move the debris. I climbed down before anyone could stop me. Grace wiped her cheek. He was in pain. He knew he was badly hurt. Did he ask for me? Grace nodded. Vivian covered her mouth. He asked whether the children from the SUV were safe first. Caleb looked away. Grace continued. I told him they were. Then he asked about the maintenance worker. I said he was alive. What did Nathan say? He smiled. Vivian's eyes closed as tears slipped free. Grace waited until she opened them again. Then he said there was something I had to tell his wife. Vivian stopped breathing. He gave me your first name, only Vivian. He tried to tell me where you lived, but he could not speak clearly. Grace's voice shook. I promised I would find you. What was the message? Grace looked at her with the sorrow of someone who had carried another person's final words for too many years. He said, Tell her I heard her. Vivian gripped the table. Grace continued. Then he said, Tell her I was trying to come home. Vivian made no sound. Her body simply folded. She bent forward, one hand over her mouth, the other pressed against her chest. Caleb moved before thinking. He came around the table and knelt beside her chair. He did not touch her. Not yet. Vivian's breathing became uneven. I thought he did not hear me, she said. Grace's face crumpled. He heard you. I was angry. You were afraid. I told him not to go. He knew why. Vivian shook her head. You cannot know that. Grace leaned closer. He touched his chest when he spoke about you. He kept reaching for something that was not there. The compass. Vivian looked toward Caleb. He removed the necklace slowly. The silver pendant rested in his palm. Grace recognized it. That was what he was reaching for. Caleb stood and placed it on the table. Vivian touched the scratched metal. The engraved words faced upward. Find your way home. For years, the phrase had felt cruel. Nathan had not come home. She had believed the promise was broken. Now she saw the mountain road, the frightened children, the injured driver, the girl beside the barrier. Nathan had been trying to create a path home for everyone he could reach, even while knowing his own might be closing. Vivian picked up the necklace. The cord slid through her fingers. What happened after he spoke, she asked. Grace's eyes filled again. He asked whether the girl was safe. She was, yes. Then he looked up at the snow. Grace paused. He said it was beautiful. Vivian bowed her head. Nathan had always loved the first snow. He used to wake her before sunrise and pull open the curtains as if winter had performed only for them. Grace continued. Daniel stayed on one side of him. I stayed on the other. Nathan did not die alone. Vivian pressed the compass against her heart. A sound escaped her, quiet and broken. Caleb placed one hand on the back of her chair. She reached blindly and caught his sleeve. That was the permission he had waited for. He covered her hand with his. They remained that way until her breathing slowed. Grace rose and walked toward the counter, giving them privacy without leaving the room. Vivian stared at Caleb's hand over hers. You carried his last piece for 9 years. I did not know. You searched. Not enough. You had a wife who was sick, a child, a life. So did he. Vivian looked at him. Nathan chose to help you. Caleb lowered his eyes. I have asked myself 1,000 times why he pushed me out of the way. Because you were there. That is not an answer. It was for Nathan. Caleb looked toward Grace. Sometimes I wish he had not. Vivian's hand tightened beneath his. Do not say that. He died, and you lived. The force in her voice surprised them both. Vivian released his sleeve and wiped her face. My husband did not save you so you could spend the rest of your life apologizing for breathing. Caleb stared at her. The words carried no accusation, only certainty. Grace returned with an old wooden box. I kept copies of everything she said. The statement I gave investigators, the letter I wrote you, Emma's notes from that night. She placed the box on the table. Vivian opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, and an envelope with her name written across the front. Vivian Hale. The letter had never been mailed. A second envelope beneath it carried a return delivery label from Hale Meridian's former office. Vivian touched the faded ink. Grace sat again. I tried twice. Then I thought maybe you did not want to hear from anyone who had been there. I did not know what I wanted. I understand. No, Vivian said softly. I do not think I understood it myself. They remained in the cafe for another hour. Grace described Nathan's voice the way he kept asking about other people the moment snow began falling across the ravine. Caleb asked questions about the rescue timeline. Vivian asked fewer questions. She listened. When they finally stood to leave, Grace held Vivian's hands. I am sorry it took so long. Vivian shook her head. You stayed with him. It was the least I could do. No. Vivian looked into her eyes. It was everything. Outside, snow had begun falling in wide, soft flakes. Caleb stood beside the SUV while Vivian remained near the cafe door. She opened her hand. The compass lay against her palm. Caleb watched her. It belongs to you, he said. Vivian approached him. It belonged to Nathan. And you were his wife. You carried it through Laura's illness. His expression tightened. That does not make it mine? No. But it means its story did not end on the mountain. She held it toward him. Caleb did not take it. I cannot keep wearing your husband's necklace. You were wearing it before you knew his name. That was different. Why? Because I thought it belonged to a stranger. Vivian's eyes remained on him. And now I know what it cost. She looked at the pendant. So do I. Snow settled in Caleb's dark hair. Vivian placed the compass in his hand and closed his fingers around it. I am not ready to take it back. He searched her face. Then what am I supposed to do with it? Keep it safe. For how long? Vivian looked toward the mountains. I do not know. Caleb opened his hand. The compass caught the pale winter light. We, Vivian said quietly, will decide when it is no longer only about what either of us lost. The word stayed between them. We. Neither mentioned it. They drove toward the memorial site before returning to Seattle. Nathan's name was engraved on a stone wall overlooking the valley. Snow covered the path untouched, except for the prints of birds. Vivian stopped at the entrance. Caleb remained several steps behind her. She had paid for the memorial, approved the design, attended the dedication through a private video link. She had never stood before it. You do not have to go closer, Caleb said. Vivian looked at the stone. Yes, I do. She walked slowly. At Nathan's name, she removed one glove and placed her palm against the cold surface. For a long time, she said nothing. Then her voice came softly. I am sorry I was angry. Wind moved through the trees. I was so afraid you would choose everyone else over me. Her fingers traced the engraved letters. I did not understand that helping them was part of the man I loved. Caleb lowered his gaze. Vivian pressed her forehead against the stone. I know you heard me now. Her shoulders shook once. I know you were coming home. Caleb stood close enough to reach her far enough to let the moment belong to Nathan. After several minutes, Vivian turned. Her face was wet with tears, but something inside it had changed, not healed, released. They began walking back along the snowy path. Near the edge of the parking area, Vivian's shoe slipped on a patch of ice. Caleb caught her around the waist. Her hands landed against his chest. For one suspended second, neither moved. Vivian felt the warmth of him beneath his coat. Caleb felt her breath against his face. The silver compass rested between them. Her eyes lifted to his. Something passed through the silence that had nothing to do with Nathan, Laura, or the mountain. It frightened them both. Vivian stepped back first. Thank you, she said. Caleb released her carefully. You are welcome. She looked down at the ice. For catching me. I know. They walked the remaining distance with more space between them than before. At the SUV, Vivian opened the driver's door, then paused. Caleb stood on the other side of the vehicle holding the necklace in his hand. Put it on, she said. He looked at her. Are you sure? No. The honesty brought the faintest smile to his face. Caleb fastened the cord around his neck. Vivian watched the compass settle against his chest. This time the sight did not feel like theft. It felt like a road still being traveled. The compass remained around Caleb's neck during the drive back to Seattle. Neither of them mentioned it again. By the time the mountains disappeared behind rain and city traffic, the silence between Vivian and Caleb had changed. It was no longer the silence of two strangers measuring each other. It held the weight of everything Grace had told them, along with the brief moment on the ice that neither was ready to examine. Caleb asked Vivian to leave him at the workshop. It is Sunday, she said. You are not working tonight. I need to check the chair. The glue had several hours. It has been through enough neglect. Vivian pulled to the curb outside Morgan Restoration. Caleb opened the door, then paused. Are you going home? Yes. To Nathan's study. She looked toward the rain moving across the windshield. Probably. Caleb rested one hand on the door. Eat something first. Vivian turned toward him. Was that an instruction? A suggestion. You are not good at making those sound different. He gave her a tired smile. Good night, Vivian. It was the first time he had used her name without anger or distance. She watched him enter the workshop before driving away. 3 days passed. Vivian attended meetings, reviewed contracts, and answered questions about expansion plans. Her voice remained clear. Her decisions remained precise. Yet Grace's words followed her through every room. Tell her I heard her. Tell her I was trying to come home. At night, Vivian sat in Nathan's study and read the letter Grace had written years earlier. She read it until she could hear the mountain in every sentence. For the first time since Nathan's death, she opened the curtains. Morning light entered the room. It revealed dust on the shelves, faded marks on the carpet, and the ordinary evidence of time continuing even where she had tried to stop it. On Thursday afternoon, Vivian left her office early. Marianne followed her to the elevator. "Where are you going to Ballard?" "Why, Vivian, press the lobby button. I have a chair." Marianne looked at her. "You own hundreds of chairs. This one is damaged. That has never troubled you before." The elevator doors opened. Vivian stepped inside. "No," she said. "It has not." When she entered Morgan Restoration, Caleb was standing on a ladder adjusting a light fixture above the workbench. Sophie sat at a small table near the window coloring a wooden bird with purple paint. She looked up first. "The necklace lady is here." Caleb nearly dropped the screwdriver. "Sophie." What Vivian removed her coat. "It is accurate." Sophie studied her. "Are you still mad, no? Are you still scared?" Vivian considered the question. "A little." Sophie nodded as if this made sense. Caleb climbed down from the ladder. "What are you doing here? I need something restored." Vivian stepped outside and returned carrying a small wooden writing desk with help from a delivery worker. Caleb stared at it. The desk was dark walnut, carefully made and almost entirely undamaged. He opened one drawer. It moved smoothly. He checked the legs. Solid. He examined the surface beneath the light. There is nothing wrong with this. The second drawer sticks. Caleb pulled it open. It did not stick. He tried again. Still smooth. Vivian kept her expression neutral. It sticks at home. Maybe it dislikes the penthouse. That would be unreasonable. Furniture can be particular. Sophie looked up from her bird. "She came because she likes you." The workshop became very quiet. Caleb closed the drawer. Vivian looked at Sophie. Sophie dipped her brush into the purple paint. "My dad likes you too," Sophie Caleb said. "What, you wore the blue shirt?" Caleb glanced down at himself. Vivian's mouth curved. "What does the blue shirt mean? Nothing," Caleb answered. "It is his good shirt," Sophie said. Caleb took the desk receipt from a drawer. "I will call when the imaginary problem is repaired." Vivian placed one hand on the desk. There is also a scratch, where she pointed to a mark so faint that Caleb had to lean close to see it. Yes, that is not damage. It bothers me." Caleb looked at her. "You drove across Seattle for a mark smaller than a grain of rice. It is an important desk. What is inside it?" "Nothing." "Then the desk is not the reason you are here." Vivian met his eyes. "No," she said. The answer took the humor out of his face. Sophie continued painting, though her brush had stopped moving. Vivian turned toward her. "That bird is beautiful. It is supposed to be an eagle." Caleb looked at the purple shape. "It is becoming an eagle. It looks like a potato," Sophie said. Vivian moved closer. "A very determined potato." Sophie laughed. She pushed a second unpainted bird across the table. "You can make one. I do not know how. You put paint on it. That sounds dangerously simple." Sophie handed her a brush. Vivian removed her jacket and sat on the workshop floor beside the table. For the next 20 minutes, the billionaire founder of Hale Meridian Technologies painted a wooden bird beneath the serious supervision of a 7-year-old. Vivian's bird had uneven wings, one enormous eye, and a green line across its stomach. Sophie turned it in her hands. "It looks confused. It is abstract. It is a potato with wings." Caleb laughed from the workbench. Vivian looked over her shoulder. The sound stopped him. Their eyes held for a moment. She had heard him laugh before, but not like this. Not with his shoulders loose and his face unguarded. Sophie placed Vivian's bird beside her own. "They can be friends." Vivian looked at the two strange wooden creatures standing together. "I think they already are." After that afternoon, Vivian returned often. At first, each visit came with a reason. She asked Caleb to inspect the memorial bench near Nathan's stone. Rain had damaged one side, and the original contractor wanted to replace it. Caleb ran his hand across the cracked wood. "It does not need replacing." Vivian stood beside him beneath a clear Seattle sky. "Can you repair it?" "Yes." "Will the crack show yes?" She looked at him. He smiled slightly. "That question again. I like certainty. Then you chose the wrong material. Wood remembers everything." She commissioned toys for the Pediatric Rehabilitation Center. Caleb made wooden trains, puzzles animals, and small boats with rounded edges. Vivian arrived one evening to find Sophie sanding a piece of maple. "You should be wearing safety glasses," Vivian said. Sophie pointed to the top of her head. The glasses were resting in her hair. Those only work when they cover your eyes. They make my nose sweaty. Vivian picked them up and adjusted the strap. Your nose will survive. Caleb watched from across the room as Sophie obeyed without argument. You have a gift, he said, for tightening straps, for getting her to listen. Vivian looked at the child. She listens to you, after the 4th request. You make requests? Caleb smiled. On Friday, Sophie invited Vivian to dinner. We have pizza, she said. Dad burns the edges. I do not burn them, Caleb replied. The oven has strong opinions. Vivian hesitated. She had a late call scheduled with investors in California. A formal dinner waited in her refrigerator, prepared by a chef who came twice a week. Sophie watched her. You can leave if it is bad. Vivian put away her phone. All right. Pizza night took place at Caleb's small kitchen table. The crust was burned along one side. Sophie talked through most of the meal, describing a classmate who had brought a live beetle to school and lost it during mathematics. Vivian listened with an attention she usually reserved for major negotiations. After dinner, Sophie chose a movie and sat between them on the couch. Halfway through, she fell asleep with her head in Vivian's lap. Vivian froze. Caleb noticed. You can move her. She might wake up. She sleeps through thunder. Vivian looked down at the child's face. A strand of hair had fallen across Sophie's cheek. Vivian moved it gently aside. No, she whispered. She is comfortable. Caleb watched her longer than he intended. The movie continued forgotten. When Vivian finally left, Caleb stood with her beneath the porch light. Rain had begun again. You did not have to stay so late, he said. I wanted to. He looked through the window at Sophie sleeping on the couch. She likes you. I like her. She gets attached quickly. The caution in his voice was gentle but clear. Vivian understood. I will not make promises I cannot keep. Caleb looked at her. I was not asking for a promise. Yes, you were. He did not deny it. Vivian stepped into the rain. Good night, Caleb. Good night. She drove away before either of them said more. The idea for the Compass project began 2 weeks later. Vivian entered the workshop while Caleb was teaching a man from the neighborhood family center how to repair a cabinet. The man's name was Marcus. He had lost his wife the previous year and left his warehouse job to care for her during treatment. Now he could not find stable work. I am not good at this, Marcus said after the hinge slipped for the 3rd time. Caleb picked up the fallen screw and placed it back in his palm. You are not bad at it. It looks bad. You are unpracticed. Marcus stared at him. That sounds like the polite version of bad. It is the accurate version. Caleb guided his hand toward the hinge. Bad means there is something wrong with you. Unpracticed means you need time. Vivian stood near the door listening. Marcus tried again. This time the hinge held. His face changed. It was a small success, almost invisible, but Vivian recognized its weight. She remembered the vocational proposal she had dismissed in the boardroom. Fewer than 60 families in the first year. She had called the impact too limited. Now one man stood straighter because a cabinet door closed properly. After Marcus left, Vivian placed the rejected proposal on Caleb's workbench. What is this, he asked. A program Hail Meridian declined. Caleb read the first page. Why it was considered too small. By whom, me. He looked up. Vivian did not defend herself. She described the idea that had been forming. A training center for widowed parents and families rebuilding after loss. Practical skills, childcare during classes, transportation support, job placement, partnerships with local businesses. Caleb read the proposal again. You want to fund it? Yes. And put your name on the building? No. He studied her. No, I want you to help design it. Caleb set down the papers. I repair furniture. You teach people. Sometimes. You gave Marcus more confidence in 20 minutes than most leadership consultants create in a year. That says more about leadership consultants. Vivian almost smiled. Caleb continued. You cannot repair people by putting them in a building with your name above the door. I know. Do you? The question carried no cruelty. That made it harder. Vivian looked around the workshop. I used to think writing a check was the same as showing up. What changed? She glanced at the compass. You did. Caleb's expression shifted. Vivian continued before he could answer. And Nathan, Grace, Sophie, all of it. Caleb looked down at the proposal. If we do this, it cannot be speeches and photographs. Agreed. Parents need childcare or they cannot attend. We provide it. Bus passes. Yes. Tools they can keep. Yes. Real job commitments before training starts. Vivian nodded. No ceremonial certificates with no work behind them. Agreed. Caleb closed the folder. And I do not work for you. No, I work with the families. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. All right. The early planning brought them closer. It also exposed every difference between them. Vivian moved quickly. Caleb wanted each family consulted before decisions were made. Vivian preferred polished reports. Caleb wrote notes on pieces of scrap wood. Vivian scheduled meetings in 30-minute blocks. Caleb refused to stop a conversation because a clock told him to. They argued over classroom layouts, training schedules, and the color of the walls. You cannot paint every room gray, Caleb told her. It is neutral. It is depressing. It is professional. It looks like an office where hope goes to die. Sophie, sitting beneath the table with crayons, held up a page covered in yellow. Use this. Vivian and Caleb looked at each other. The classrooms were painted warm cream. Their most serious conflict came before the first wall was finished. Vivian arrived at the center one morning and found Caleb standing beside a stack of newspapers. His face was hard. On the front page was a photograph of them inside the workshop. The headline described Caleb as a struggling widower rescued by billionaire philanthropist Vivian Hale. Vivian felt the blood leave her face. I did not approve this. Caleb held up the paper. But your public relations team provided the photograph. I did not know they had it. They know everything else about me. Caleb. They wrote about Laura's illness, Sophie's school, my debt. Vivian reached for the newspaper. He pulled it away. I told you I would not become anyone's charity case. You are not. That is what the article calls me without using the words. I will have it corrected. It is already printed. His voice rose for the first time since the gala. Workers nearby became quiet. Vivian lowered her voice. I am trying to build something that helps people. You are building a story where you are the person who saves us. That is not fair. Is it not? No. Your company name is on every document. Your face is in every article. Because my money is paying for it. The sentence escaped before she could stop it. Caleb went still. Vivian closed her eyes. And there it is, he said. I did not mean it that way. You did not have to. He placed his center access card on the table. I am done. Caleb, do not walk away from the families because you are angry with me. His eyes sharpened. Do not use them to make me stay. He left. Vivian stood in the unfinished training room surrounded by tools, paint, and conversations that had ended the moment she spoke. She did not send Marianne after him. She did not ask lawyers to remind him of contracts. There was no contract. That had been Caleb's condition. Vivian went to the community center alone. She sat with the parents whose stories had been used in the article. She listened while they told her exactly what had been taken from them. Privacy, dignity, control over the way their losses were presented. The following morning, Vivian held a press conference outside the unfinished building. She did not mention Caleb's private anger. She accepted responsibility. The Compass Project does not exist to turn grieving families into advertising, she said. The people this program serves are not supporting characters in a story about wealth. They designed this project and they will lead it. She announced that Hale Meridian's name would be removed from the building. The project would operate through an independent community board. Parents in the program would control the use of their stories and images. Vivian's funding would remain, but ownership would not. Later that day, she faced her corporate board. One director called the decision a wasted public relations opportunity. Vivian closed the presentation on the screen. Then stopped measuring every human outcome like a quarterly report. The room became silent. She committed personal funds and removed the project from the corporate marketing budget. Caleb saw the press conference from the workshop. Sophie sat beside him. She said, "Sorry," Sophie observed. "Yes, are you still mad?" "Yes, can you be mad and forgive someone?" Caleb looked at his daughter. "You ask difficult questions. You say that when you do not know." The next morning he returned to the center. Vivian was painting a wall alone. Her expensive jacket lay over a chair. A line of cream paint crossed her cheek. Caleb stood in the doorway. You missed a spot. She turned. I thought you were done. I was. And now he walked closer. Now I am unpracticed. Vivian looked at him. The faintest smile appeared between them. I was wrong, she said. Yes, you do not have to agree that quickly. I did not want to interrupt. She put down the roller. I cannot promise I will always understand how my power affects a room. Caleb nodded. But I can promise to listen when someone tells me. He picked up a second roller. That is a start. They worked beside each other without speaking. When their hands met on the paint tray, neither moved away immediately. Weeks passed. The center took shape. Caleb brought Vivian coffee without asking how she wanted it. He had noticed after the third workshop visit. Vivian kept extra hair ties in her purse because Sophie lost hers almost every afternoon. They repaired Nathan's memorial bench together. Caleb preserved the cracked section rather than hiding it. Vivian ran her fingers across the restored wood. It is stronger here, yes, because of the repair. Because someone finally stopped pretending the break was not there. On the anniversary of Nathan's death, Caleb found Vivian alone inside the center after everyone had left. She sat on the floor beneath the new classroom windows. I was happy today, she said. He sat beside her. That sounds serious. It feels like betrayal. Caleb did not tell her it was not. He understood too well. Vivian looked at her hands. When I laugh with you, I think of him. I think of Laura too. Does it stop? No? She turned toward him. Then how do people do this? Caleb leaned back against the wall. Laura once told me love is not a room with one chair. Vivian waited. I thought she was trying to make me feel better. And now I think she was telling me there could still be space. The building settled around them. A bus moved along the street outside. Vivian looked at Caleb's mouth, then his eyes. He noticed. For one breath, the distance between them felt unnecessary. Vivian leaned closer. Then fear crossed her face. She turned away. Caleb did not follow. We do not have to name this before we are ready, he said. Vivian looked toward the dark windows. What if I am never ready? Then I will still be glad I knew you. Her eyes returned to him. The tenderness in his voice was more frightening than desire. She reached for his hand. They sat that way until the room became completely dark. Sophie's fear surfaced several days later. She overheard two volunteers talking about Vivian and Caleb as if their future had already been decided. That evening, she removed Vivian's wooden bird from the windowsill and placed it inside a drawer. Caleb found her crying beside Laura's photograph. He sat on the floor. What happened? Sophie wiped her face with both hands. If you love someone new, does Mom get smaller? Caleb's chest tightened. No, but where does she go? She does not go anywhere. What if you forget her voice? I will not. What if I do? He pulled her into his arms. Then I will help you remember. Sophie pressed her face against his shirt. Do you love Vivian? Caleb looked toward the kitchen window. Rain moved across the glass. I care about her. That is not what I asked. No, he said. It is not. The following afternoon, Vivian came to the house. Sophie sat at the kitchen table with her arms folded. Vivian took the chair across from her. I heard you are worried. Sophie looked at Caleb. You told her. I asked him, Vivian said. Sophie looked down. Vivian placed Laura's framed photograph between them. I would never ask you to make less room for your mother. Do you still love Nathan every day? Then how can you like my dad? Vivian looked toward Caleb, then back at Sophie. Because missing someone and caring about someone else can both be true. Sophie considered this. Would Nathan be mad? I do not know. Vivian's honesty surprised her. But I think he would want me to live honestly. Mom wanted Dad to do tomorrow. Vivian looked at Caleb. He nodded. Sophie reached across the table. Vivian took her hand. Several weeks later, the Compass Project opened its doors. Parents entered classrooms filled with tools, computers, work tables, and warm cream walls chosen by a child with yellow crayons. Caleb stood near the workshop entrance, helping a nervous father adjust his safety glasses. Vivian remained near the back of the room, speaking quietly with the independent board. Her name appeared nowhere above the doors. Sophie moved between them, carrying a box of wooden compasses. When the room filled with conversation, she placed one hand in Caleb's and the other in Vivian's. For a moment, the three of them stood together. No one called it a family. No one needed to. Above the entrance waited an empty glass display case. Caleb looked toward it, then down at Nathan's compass resting against his chest. Vivian followed his gaze. Sophie squeezed both their hands. The opening ceremony began beneath the sound of nervous applause. Caleb stood near the front of the main workshop with Sophie beside him. Vivian remained several steps away, close enough to share the moment and far enough to let the room belong to the people who had built it. Sunlight entered through the high warehouse windows and spread across rows of new work tables. The smell of cut wood mixed with fresh paint and coffee. In the classrooms beyond the workshop, computers waited beneath bright lamps. A childcare room had been filled with books, puzzles, blankets, and small wooden animals made by Caleb and Sophie. More than 40 parents had come that morning. Some stood alone. Others held children against their shoulders or kept one hand wrapped around a small, nervous palm. Vivian recognized the expression many of them carried. It was the look of someone who had learned to keep moving because stopping would allow everything to catch up. A woman named Tessa Reed stood near the back with her 9-year-old son. Tessa had lost her husband in a construction accident 18 months earlier. She had worked part-time at a grocery store while caring for her son, but the hours were unstable and the rent had increased twice. During her interview for the Compass project, she had apologized for crying. Caleb had handed her a box of screws and asked her to separate them by size. She stared at him. Why? Because your hands need something to do while you talk. She had finished sorting the entire box before telling him she had not slept through the night since her husband died. Now she stood beneath the workshop lights with the first group of students. Vivian watched Caleb step toward the microphone. He had prepared a speech. She knew because Sophie had found 6 crumpled versions in the trash and delivered them to Vivian as evidence that her father was panicking. Caleb unfolded a page from his pocket. Then he looked at the faces in front of him. He put the paper away. "My name is Caleb Morgan," he said. "I restore furniture for a living, which means people bring me things after somebody has already decided they are ruined." A few quiet smiles appeared. Most of the time the damage is easy to see. A broken leg, a split frame, water stains, fire marks. Sometimes the damage is hidden beneath paint or cloth. You only find it when you begin taking the piece apart. Vivian listened from the edge of the room. Caleb looked toward the work tables. "I am not going to tell anyone here that pain makes you stronger. Sometimes pain only hurts. Sometimes it takes your sleep, your plans, your savings, and the person you thought would be beside you when life became difficult." The room became still. "What I can tell you is that a break does not always decide what something becomes." Tessa lowered her eyes. Caleb continued. "We built this place because learning a skill can return more than income. It can return a morning routine, a reason to leave the house, a way to look at your child and say that you do not know everything yet, but you are working on it." Sophie slipped her hand into Vivian's. Vivian looked down. The little girl leaned against her side without taking her eyes from Caleb. "There will be days when the work feels impossible," Caleb said. "There will be days when you make mistakes and decide those mistakes prove every fear you have about yourself. On those days, come back. Sit down. Pick up the tool again." He glanced toward Tessa. "You are not useless because you have not learned something yet. You are unpracticed." Tessa wiped one cheek. Caleb stepped away from the microphone. "That is enough talking. We have work to do." The applause came slowly at first, then filled the entire workshop. Vivian did not clap immediately. She watched him. Caleb turned toward her as the room began to move. Their eyes met across the crowd. No one else would have noticed the question in his expression. "Was that all right?" Vivian nodded once. It was more than all right. For the next several months, the Compass project became part of their daily lives. Vivian continued running Hail Meridian, but she no longer allowed her schedule to be treated as something sacred. On Tuesday mornings, she attended meetings with the project board. On Thursday afternoons, she reviewed job partnerships with local businesses. She listened more than she spoke. When she forgot, Caleb reminded her with a look. Tessa entered the electrical repair program. At first, she struggled to remember the difference between wires, breakers, and circuits. She wrote every instruction in a small blue notebook and checked each page 3 times before touching a tool. Her instructor told Caleb she was too cautious. Caleb disagreed. She has spent 18 months believing one mistake could take away the little she has left. Caution is not the problem. What is? She does not trust her own hands. Caleb began staying after class twice a week. He gave Tessa damaged lamps, broken switches, and old electrical panels that could be taken apart safely. Each time she repaired one, he placed another in front of her. She rarely smiled when something worked. She only exhaled as if she had been holding her breath since the day her husband died. Sophie spent afternoons in the childcare room after school. She helped younger children with puzzles and gave each new family a wooden animal from the workshop. Vivian kept a hairbrush and a collection of colored bands in her office because Sophie often arrived with her hair falling across her face. One evening, Sophie sat on the carpet beneath Vivian's desk while completing a school assignment. The task asked her to draw her family. Vivian tried not to look. Sophie drew Caleb first, then Laura beneath a yellow star, then herself in the center. She paused with the pencil above the page. Vivian focused on the report in front of her. Sophie selected a dark blue crayon and drew another figure beside Caleb. The figure wore a long dress and had hair reaching almost to the ground. "Is that me?" Vivian asked. Sophie looked up. "You were not supposed to look. I apologize. Your hair is difficult. It does not reach the floor. It does in the picture." Vivian looked at the drawing again. Nathan was not there. The absence felt strange. Sophie noticed her expression. "Do you want me to draw him?" Vivian did not know how to answer. Sophie picked up a silver crayon. She drew a small compass above Vivian's shoulder. "There," she said. Vivian touched the edge of the paper. "Thank you." Sophie returned to her homework as if nothing important had happened. Vivian sat quietly for several minutes before continuing her work. Caleb and Vivian still moved carefully around what had grown between them. They had not kissed since the moment nearly shared in the unfinished classroom. There were dinners, long drives, and evenings on Caleb's porch after Sophie had fallen asleep. There were accidental touches that did not feel accidental, and silences that asked more than either of them answered. Caleb knew Vivian sometimes visited Nathan's memorial alone. Vivian knew Caleb still spoke to Laura when he stood in the kitchen after midnight. Neither treated the past like a rival, yet the future remained unnamed. 1 year after the gala, the Compass Project prepared for its first graduation ceremony. 27 parents had completed training. 22 already had confirmed jobs. 3 had started small businesses. 2 planned to continue studying. Tessa had accepted a position with a residential maintenance company that offered steady hours and health insurance. The morning of graduation, she stood in front of a mirror inside the women's restroom trying to fasten the collar of a new white shirt. Her fingers shook. Vivian found her there. "I cannot do this," Tessa said. Vivian leaned against the sink. "You repaired the electrical system in half this building." That was different. How the building was not watching me. Vivian stepped closer and fixed the collar. "Tessa, most people in that room are thinking about their own fear. That is not comforting. It should be. It means they have less time to judge yours." Tessa gave a nervous laugh. Her eyes filled. "My husband should be here." Vivian did not answer quickly. "Yes," she said. "He should." Tessa looked down. "I thought getting the job would make me feel finished. Finished with what? Being broken." Vivian adjusted the edge of her collar. "I do not think that is how it works." Tessa met her eyes. Vivian continued, "You can miss him and still walk into that room. One does not cancel the other." Tessa breathed slowly, then she nodded. When they entered the workshop, every chair was filled. Families stood along the walls. Children leaned over the railing of the upper level. Handmade wooden compasses rested on a long table near the stage. Caleb waited backstage in a dark suit. Vivian joined him. His tie was slightly crooked. She reached up and straightened it. "This tie cost more than my first car," he said. "Your first car caught fire. It still had character. It had no brakes. They worked occasionally." Vivian smoothed the fabric against his chest. The silver compass rested beneath his shirt. Caleb watched her face. "You all right?" She nodded. "Are you? No. You spoke at the opening. There were fewer people. You ignored the speech you wrote. I plan to do that again." Vivian smiled. "You will be fine." Caleb looked toward the curtain. "You say that with a dangerous amount of confidence. I have seen you convince a grieving man that a cabinet hinge could change his life. It did not change his life, no. You reminded him that his hands still worked. Their eyes held. The noise beyond the curtain softened. Caleb lifted one hand and touched a loose strand of hair near Vivian's cheek. He stopped before moving it. Vivian did not step away. Sophie appeared between them. "Everyone can see your feet under the curtain." Caleb lowered his hand. Vivian looked down. Several pairs of shoes were visible beneath the fabric. Sophie sighed. "You are both bad at being secret." She took Caleb's hand and pulled him toward the stage. The ceremony began with Tessa. She crossed the stage while her son shouted her name from the front row. Caleb handed her a certificate and a wooden compass. She held both against her chest. For the first time since Vivian had known her, Tessa smiled without hesitation. Each graduate received the same small compass. There was no needle inside. The back carried 2 words, "Hope points forward." After the final name was called, Caleb approached the microphone. He looked at the graduates standing beside him. "When people restore old wood, they often try to hide every mark," he said. "They sand away, scratches, cover stains, and fill cracks until the piece looks untouched." He picked up one of the compasses. But untouched is not the same as whole. Vivian watched from the side of the stage. Caleb turned the compass in his hand. Some repairs remain visible. A new piece joins the old one. A line stays where the wood once split. That line is not proof that the repair failed. He looked at Sophie. It is proof that someone believed the piece was worth keeping. Caleb returned the compass to the table. The graduates stood in silence. Then Tessa began clapping. The room followed. After the ceremony, families filled the workshop with conversation. Children ran between tables. Cameras flashed. Instructors embraced students who had once refused to meet their eyes. Vivian was speaking with a city official when Sophie appeared beside her. "Come with me. Were you asked too many questions?" Sophie took her hand. She led Vivian through the crowd toward the entrance. Caleb was already standing beside the empty glass display case. "What is this?" he asked. Sophie ignored him. She climbed onto a low bench and reached beneath the collar of her dress. A silver chain appeared. Nathan's compass rested against her chest. Vivian looked at Caleb. He touched his empty collar. "You gave it to her. She asked to borrow it this morning. You knew about this. I knew she wanted to show us something." Sophie removed the chain and held the compass carefully in both hands. She looked at Vivian. "Dad said Nathan saved him." Vivian nodded. "And Dad saved me when Mom died." Caleb lowered his eyes. Sophie continued. "You helped Dad make this place. Then everyone here started helping each other." The room around them remained loud, but the space beside the display case felt separate from it. Sophie opened Vivian's hand and placed the compass in her palm. "So maybe it does not belong to one person." Vivian stared at the scratched silver. The same tiny mark still crossed the clasp. The same words remained engraved on the back. "Find your way home." She looked at Caleb. His eyes were wet. "Are you sure he asked Sophie?" Sophie nodded. It found its way home. She looked around the building. Home is just bigger now. Vivian closed her fingers around the compass. For years she had imagined locking it inside Nathan's study, placing it beside his ring, and watch restoring the collection of things death had scattered. Now the thought felt wrong. Nathan had worn the compass into a storm. Caleb had carried it through Laura's illness and the years after. Sophie had grown up believing it meant her father would keep coming home. The object no longer belonged to a single memory. Vivian opened the display case. Inside, Sophie had already placed the faded rescue photograph. Nathan stood in the rain behind Caleb. Grace and Emma were visible near the emergency vehicles. The moment had once seemed incomplete. Now Vivian could see the lives extending beyond the edges of the image. She placed the compass beside the photograph. Caleb closed the glass. A simple plaque rested beneath it. The compass that connected 2 families. Below those words, a smaller inscription described Nathan's rescue, Caleb's search, and the program created years later. Vivian read the final line. "Kindness is never lost. It travels until someone needs it." She looked at Sophie. "Did you write that I helped?" Caleb smiled. "She rejected all my suggestions. They were too long." Vivian crouched and wrapped her arms around Sophie. The child held her tightly. Caleb stood beside them with one hand resting against the glass. Later that evening, after the graduates and their families had left, The three of them drove to Nathan's memorial garden. The sky was clear. Seattle glowed beneath the fading light. Sophie carried 2 flowers, one white, one yellow. At Nathan's stone, she placed the white flower beneath his name. Then she set Laura's framed photograph on the memorial bench and laid the yellow flower beside it. Caleb watched her. "What are you doing? They should both be here." Vivian sat beside the photograph. Sophie studied Nathan's engraved name, then looked at Laura's smiling face. They would probably be friends. Caleb sat on the other side of the bench. "Your mom would talk too much. Nathan would listen too much," Vivian said. Sophie appeared satisfied with this arrangement. She ran toward the fountain at the center of the garden. "Do not climb on it," Caleb called. "I am not." She was already climbing onto the lowest stone. Caleb started to stand. Vivian touched his arm. "She is fine. She is standing over water. It is 6 inches deep. She can fall in 6 inches. Vivian smiled. "You worry beautifully." He looked at her. The smile faded, but the warmth remained. They sat together while Sophie dropped a coin into the fountain and closed her eyes. "I spent years thinking moving forward meant leaving Nathan behind," Vivian said. Caleb followed her gaze toward the child. "And now I think he spent his final night making sure other people had a future." She turned toward him. "It would be a strange way to honor him if I refused to have one." Caleb's hand rested between them on the bench. Vivian placed hers over it. He looked down at their joined fingers. "I cannot promise this will be simple," he said. "I do not trust simple. I am serious. So am I." He turned toward her. "I am not Nathan, I know. You will never have with me what you had with him. I know that too." His thumb moved across the back of her hand. "And you are not Laura." "No, I do not want you to be." Vivian looked toward Laura's photograph. "Neither do I." Caleb breathed slowly. "Is that enough?" Vivian considered the question. The city moved around them. Water fell softly inside the fountain. Sophie whispered her wish beneath the evening sky. "It is honest," Vivian said. Caleb lifted his free hand to her face. This time he did not stop. His fingers rested gently against her cheek. Vivian leaned toward him. Their first kiss was quiet. There was no rush in it, no attempt to recover what either had lost. It was uncertain, warm, and entirely new. When they drew apart, Caleb kept his forehead against hers. Vivian closed her eyes. "I think Sophie is watching us. She has been watching us for months. You knew she told me we were bad at being secret." Vivian laughed softly. Across the garden, Sophie covered her eyes with both hands while leaving a wide space between her fingers. Caleb stood and held out one hand. Vivian took it. They walked toward the fountain. Sophie jumped down from the stone and slipped between them, taking one of Caleb's hands and one of Vivian's. Together they followed the path toward the garden entrance. Behind them, Nathan's memorial bench remained beneath the trees. Laura's photograph rested on the wood beside 2 flowers. Inside the Compass Project, the silver necklace waited behind glass, no longer missing and no longer carried by only one person. Its journey had passed through rain-mud hospital rooms, empty houses, school mornings, burned pizza, unfinished classrooms, and hands learning how to work again. Caleb looked down at Sophie between them. Vivian felt his fingers tighten around hers. The 3 of them continued toward the lights beyond the garden. No one asked where the road ended. For that evening it was enough that they were walking it together.